Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Gist, a limited podcast series powered by Energy Central, covering the big, bold, and impactful technological developments in geospatial information systems that are permanently altering the modern power grid. I'm Energy Central Community Manager and your host for this series, Matt Chester. Maps show us where things are, but what if they could show us what we don't know yet? Patterns we can't see, risks we didn't expect, opportunities waiting to be uncovered. Today, we're exploring GIS as more than a mapping tool. We're looking at it as a discovery engine for utilities. From spotting hidden load growth trends to predicting where tomorrow's grid challenges might pop up, GIS is quietly helping utilities connect the dots in powerful new ways. In today's episode, we'll unpack how pairing geography with data can reveal the insights that drive smarter decisions, and we'll hear some real-world stories where utilities uncovered game-changing discoveries that they didn't see coming. And we're doing it once again with our good friends at Esri, frequent contributors to Energy Central, Bill Meehan and Pat Hohl. Their team at Esri has made this episode possible, and we're excited to hear more about their work in this conversation. So stay tuned to hear the full rundown. If you're ready to go beyond the map and turn your data into actionable insights, you're in the right place. So let's get into it. Pat and Bill, welcome back. How's it going today?
Thanks, Matt. Going well.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Well, happy to be here.
Great. And this is the second part of our conversation. And last time we spoke, we were talking about the importance of GIS as a tool for smart data management and all that can unlock. But today, like I said, we're talking about GIS for discovery. So at the high level, how does GIS function as a tool for discovery, and what exactly is there to be discovered?
Well, I think it's a great question. I mean, you started off by saying quietly. I would propose that maybe sometimes it's not even that quiet, right? I think it's getting a lot louder. And part of that within the Esri ecosystem is a result of the way Esri operates as a company. You know, it's very unusual for a software company to put a third of their gross revenue back into research and development. And, you know, in the early days, that was around computerized mapping. In recent years and decades, that is related to this kind of capability that we're talking about, the analytic capability. And as a company, you know, the other thing that makes Esri really unique is it's a 56-year-old software company that has just seen a steady 10-ish% growth every year. I can't think of another software company like that. So there's a lot of great capability here. And you ask a good question. I would say let's start at a high level. Let's think about, since we're talking about where things are, the first thing that pops out is the relationship between those things. And I would say when you see those relationships, you can see opportunities and you can also see risks. They're both important for utilities. You know, we might first think of, well, patterns. Where are things happening? But sometimes it's just as important to say, well, where are the anomalies? Where are things not happening, right? Who is not taking advantage of our energy efficiency program because something is not right in our work there and gives us an opportunity to improve? And we know that nothing is static, right? Things are changing all the time, and we can see those trends, identify what's changing so that we can get out in front of it. Of course, we've done a lot of stories, Bill, you and I, about some of our users and utilities where they see improvements in efficiencies. Just a simple thing like routing. You know, we all used to travel with printed maps or printed directions on how to get somewhere, and now we're literally just listening to our phone tell us how to get there. Half the time, I think we don't even know exactly where we're going. It just says turn here, and you think, I don't know, that's such a great idea, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it turns out to be right. Ever had that experience, Bill?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I always think of my friend from the entertainment business, Yogi Berra. I mean, he was entertainment, was baseball and so forth. But he said these crazy things like, you know, line up alphabetically by height and all those crazy things. Well, it reminds me when I was working for the power company, we had work orders, right? We would do work orders, and you know, the maintenance or an inspection or whatever, it was work orders. And so what we would do is we'd had a work management system, and we would organize it by numbers. We'd send this crew to number 1, that crew to number 2, that crew to number 3. But we never, so we're sort of organizing work order by numerical, kind of like Yogi Berra's thing. Instead, why don't we do it by location? So that instead you'd say, didn't just passing each other, crews are passing each other. Why don't we just, not by numbers, but organize it by location so that we can optimize or minimize really the travel time? And it's surprising that utilities have not really embraced that as much as perhaps they should. Of course, today with the cost of fuel and the environmental aspects of that, just organizing all that work, not just by one to one, but by many, organizing a whole group of people. Let's just route people according to that, so that we don't end up with saying, Yogi Berra says, run our work orders numerically instead of by location, which makes a whole lot more sense.
Well, Bill, I worked for a municipal utility for a number of years. And when I was in engineering, they wanted to start a manhole inspection program. And we didn't have too many, we didn't have like thousands of big manholes that we identified as manholes as such. Do you know where they proposed we start? With number one.
Manhole one, of course.
Number one. And we were going to go right through them because that's the way that had been tracked. Yeah, there's just so much to be discovered there when you look at things in a spatial context.
So then, with all this opportunity there, where you guys are sitting at Esri, are you seeing the utilities start to make that switch and think about GIS as this discovery tool, as this insight engine, rather than just those basic maps? And how is that kind of evolution taking place over the time?
Yeah, I do. I think it's changing, and it does, of course, remind me of a story. And this is a true story. I ran into a utility executive that I met with her, and I asked her a simple question: "What's your biggest problem?" And she said, and I didn't know what her answer was going to be, reliability, or whatever. And she said, "Customer service. Our customers are really not that happy with us." And I don't know what the scale was, maybe on a scale of 1 to 5, they got a 3.1. And, the manager said, what are we going to do? Go to her and say, what are you doing to improve our customer service? And she said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to train our, customer call people to be more polite. We're going to do more tree trimming so that we can help, reliability. And we're going to install more and more smart meters and so forth. So then I asked the follow-up question. Well, how do you know that all of those three things are actually going to improve customer service? And you know what she said? We hope so. And I said in my head voice, we hope so. I said, that's probably not a great answer. I said, had you thought, now, how do you know how do you know your customer service is poor? Well, we do a survey every year. A famous survey person does this, and I won't mention who it is, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. So I said, yeah. So do you ever think about mapping the results of your customer satisfaction survey? And she said, well, no, I really never thought about that. So if you did, then you could say, now, you talked about three things, right? People talking on the phone and customer blah blah blah. I said, but do you know where the people who are most unhappy with you are? And she said, well, I know, not really. Well, why don't you correlate the work that you've done? For example, and Pat knows this, he's got stories about this, tree trimming. Where have I done tree trimming? Of course, everybody loves tree trimming. Well, guess what? No, they don't. And so maybe what you should do is figure out what have I done and how does it relate to my customer service? And then you could start to develop strategies to figure out what I can do different. Or maybe I could focus my attention in those communities that really, really care about their trees and all of that sort of stuff. So my point is that instead of saying, what am I going to do? And the answer is, I hope so. The answer is, now I know what to do. That's one of my favorite stories because it really brings about, and what we're really talking about is the technology called spatial analysis, taking two data sets or multiple data sets and putting them together. And Pat loves this word. Aha. Oh, yeah. No wonder people are unhappy with us. It's not about, we might even say, is it because of rates? Is it because of money? Is it because of this or that? You could figure that out. You could get a better sense of what to do. It's really about how I can make decisions based not just on I hope so, but on I know so.
Hope is not a strategy.
Yeah. And if we could turn to, some more real world examples, Bill, that's a great story. But, as you think through times that you've helped, GIS has helped utilities uncover something unexpected, the risks we've talked about, patterns in load growth, or even opportunities. Is there something that comes specifically to mind for each of you?
Well, one of the things that we do is tell the story of our customer success. And the first thing that comes to my mind is a company called PowerCo in New Zealand. And like many utilities in this country and around the world, they suffer from aging infrastructure and they have limited capital budget. And because their infrastructure is old, they have to spend their budget renewing that infrastructure. And they really lost a lot of time planning and even debating where and how to get the most bang for the buck. And as a result of that, they didn't get that much infrastructure updated with the budget they had allocated. What they did was they went into their system and they said, let's evaluate. Where have we had network failures in the past? Let's layer on top of that the observed condition score that we got from our last inspection. Let's add in the age of those assets. We know that we have some problematic switches and different types of assets. Let's be aware of that. And let's put all those things together. And in GIS, this is a relatively simple concept, but to just stack those variables together and then look at it on the map and see where you have the most problems. You can also correlate that with which assets would have the greatest impact if they did fail, or if you didn't have a looped system where you could back up for a failure. And they took that and they just immediately started engineering to replace those assets. As a result of that, they quadrupled their asset renewal program effectiveness in the first year. They got 4 times the work done by just paying attention to the information that they had and looking at it in a sensible way and getting to work.
One of the biggest issues we're facing now more recently is wildfires. I mean, that is a big deal, especially for areas that are populated. Now we saw what happened. It was horrible in LA. Well, one of our customers is called Avista Utilities. They're up in Washington area. And what they did is they took the bull by the horn, so to speak, and said, look, we're going to create a fire mitigation plan. So what they did is they mapped out their region. They took data from the United States government. They mapped out areas. They looked at history. They looked at, topology. They looked at all these layers, because GIS is about layers of information. And they correlated that, and they were able to map out those areas that were high risk of a wildfire based on, vegetation growth, based on, even rainfall, all of that sort of stuff. And then they took their infrastructure and mapped it on top of all of this. And then they were able to discover, basically the discovery was, where is our specific infrastructure going to be at risk of a wildfire? And so what they decided to do is that now that we know that, we have the boundaries kind of these risk areas, let's put devices at the boundaries of these risk areas so that we can, if a wildfire does occur, we don't take out many, many people just shutting down the electricity. We can selectively figure out how to manage this, turn off the power, and be managing that. So that's a great example. That's Avista Utilities. Another really good example is one of our customers. When you get a failure, this happens to be on a transmission line. A line falls down to the ground. And what they do is they take real-time data from their SCADA system or their EMS system, and because there's a relay, it's called an impedance relay. And what they are able to do is, once a fault occurs, because you get a lot more current, they were able to take that data and calculate the distance from that location to where the fault actually occurs. So what they can do is then, instead of poking around trying to figure out where the heck is this fault, they can go directly to the location where the fault is. In addition, they've also mapped out their access routes so that if they figure out not only do I know to get here, but I can also optimally route myself to that location. That's a great example of using GIS and real-time data to be able to discover something else. We're probably going to have a story about that maybe in a couple of months.
Sure, we'll wait for that one. Another kind of omnipresent challenge that we know the utilities are facing is the growing load demand and trying to forecast what that's going to be. And Bill, when I hear you talk about, laying over the customer service survey responses to geography, kind of brings to mind, well, can you do the same thing with where load growth is happening and help utilities use GIS to spot where that demand is rising in ways that may not show up in their traditional models? Is that a common practice, and can you walk us through how that works?
Oh, absolutely. And so when you think about mapping, where would people, and we'll take one particular load growth area would, of course, be electric cars, right? So electric vehicle charging stations, particularly the ones that are what we call a level 3 or the high capacity. Some of those things can actually be like substation size. They're really a huge demand. So where should we put them? Well, I don't know, just put them, I don't know, put them wherever we think we should put. We hope, I don't know. And what you do, of course, is you look at data. It's a data decision. Where is the demographics? Where would people likely where would the best place to put a charging station? Well, let's put it in the middle of nowhere. Or no, let's put it at places where they tend to be, off ramps off the freeway or along the freeway. These stations along the highway, all that sort of stuff. So using demographics, and where are people likely to be in 5 years as opposed to where they are now? Well, look at zoning, look at where industrial places have closed down. So no, we don't want to go there. We'll look at, the shifting population. So GIS does a fabulous job of monitoring and managing demographic information. And Pat, maybe you could talk about this other part of GIS, which we call tapestry. It's a fantastic. It's actually, it's like a crystal ball. We're getting this crystal ball from GIS.
Well, the thing I love about tapestry is the clever names that they give to everybody. I think there's 65 or so categories, and one of the things that Esri does is actually curate a lot of this kind of information for our users to use within the system. Every customer has access to it. And as Bill suggested, it's useful to find places that would be ideal to put charging stations, but it's also good to anticipate the demographics. Who's likely to buy an EV? I went on a walk with my wife and dog the other day, and I watched for EVs. And one of the houses in my neighborhood has 2 Teslas in the driveway and 1 in the garage. And every one of those things is like a house on wheels, and the load at that house just went from 1 house to 4 houses potentially. So that's really good. The tapestry then segments these so you can look at different areas and say, well, what kind of people live here? And they give them clever names. Like the one that always comes to my mind is laptops and lattes. And you can picture the kind of social behaviors that would go with that. Another one is soccer moms, the young and the restless, or senior escapes. And it's interesting how, as a society, we tend to split up into areas like that. And from the utilities point of view, they're going to have different spending habits. They're going to have different ideas about sustainability and efficiency in their homes and buying electric vehicles. And those things all can help us identify how to target our customer programs, but also anticipate their load growth.
My son and his family lives in a very affluent community in California. And you can probably guess what some of those places are. They live near the ocean. And the 2 words, the last one is beach, right? So, you know what those are. But I'm not going to say which town it is. But so what happened is, but those communities back in their older communities, when they were originally built, there were smaller houses and so forth. So what happened, though, is that the electrical infrastructure is relatively modest. So, for example, as Pat talks about 3 Teslas or 2 Teslas in one house, each Tesla is, if you plugged it in at the same time, it's 10 kilowatts of power continuously. And that transformer, that little old transformer sitting out in the backyard or up on the pole, is a 25 kVA transformer. Well, that's for one family who's got already 20 kilowatt load if they plug them at the same time. What about the neighbors? And of course, at that particular community, one person sees an EV, everybody's. So now all of a sudden you got 5 houses buying getting a 20 kilowatt load on a 25 kVA transformer. Well, it just won't work. So take the utilities, then overlay the infrastructure to the demographics, and you discover, holy smoke, we are in trouble. We need to figure out how to do that. So that they're going to face that. And the more AVs we get, the more difficult that situation is going to be. So demographics, and one other quick thing, reminded me of the tapestry thing. Discovery in GIS is about taking sometimes 2 different data sources that you would never ever think have anything to do with each other. And my favorite example is a police department. Let's say there's a problem in the community for graffiti. So what would you do? So the police department has, and they're big in GIS too. The police department has all this data. What if they shared that using a web service to the utility, and then look at the correlation between graffiti and streetlights? If I have more lighting or maybe streetlight damage, I could do more about or putting protection on streetlights. that probably could help reduce graffiti. I mean, it's just crazy. You don't know that for sure, but those are the kinds of things that when you think about two completely different data sets.
Yeah, and I imagine utility leaders who are listening to this and have that light bulb moment of, oh, I want to tap into that discovery potential. It might be tough to know exactly where to start in terms of the data, because it's boundless where you can turn to for data, both internal asset data and then the external data sets that you were just talking about, like demographics and things like land use and weather. So how do you recommend they start looking at that data, and which of those data sets are kind of the most important ones to start layering into their GIS to help them unlock these new insights?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say for utilities that want to tap into that potential, the very first thing to do is to start talking about it and to ask questions. When, a lot of times we make decisions based on what I call campfire stories. But a leader can say, what data supports that conclusion? And when they do that, they trigger everybody to think, oh, yeah, I need to think about that. And the question is a good one. Is that really your internal asset data? Are we talking more about demographics, weather, land use? I mean, it's all of these things. We're a very asset-centric business. And so I think you have to have a good model of your system, because you want to relate virtually everything you do to your actual system. And we talked a bit about that last time. And that would include keeping it up to date, keeping your construction information current, good as building, inspecting those facilities regularly and maintaining that information in a place where it can be used by others. And even in a storm situation, having rapid damage reporting and assessment so that you can prioritize your work. But then we've talked about layers here, layering in demographic information and consumer behavior. I just did a webinar last week with one of our business partners that specializes in weather data and using AI models to actually assign risk categories to counties when a storm is approaching. And I was really impressed. They were within a few percent anticipating how many outages would occur in a county days ahead of time with an entire week's projection, right? You look at a whole county and you might say, okay, there's 80 lights out calls on a given day, and they're projected based on historical weather and current weather forecast to be 8,000 tomorrow. Okay, you need to take action on that. And Bill, you and I were just talking last few days about an old friend of ours who had looked at land cover and soil types and moisture content and analyzed the risk of trees that were very tall falling into the lines and the effect that would have on their reliability. So that's what I would say. Start talking about it and get people thinking that, and require them to support recommendations with data. And I think you'll find people get very creative.
One of the sort of the characteristics of working in a utility, Pat and I both talked about this, is this notion of silos. I mean, there's a lot of operational silos. People, that's how, the utility industry is, 125 years old or something. I mean, and so the first place I would have people look is two things. Let's kind of break down the silos, and then you can begin to see how these relate to each other. Because if I'm sitting over here and I'm not, like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is. If we bring those together, we can figure some of this stuff out. And also the systems that we've developed are developed along siloed places. A good example is in the control room. You've got the SCADA system, which is basically schematic, and then you've got the GIS over here. So why not put the two pieces together? Or you've got what's called AMI, Advanced Meter Infrastructure, right? So putting those things together and figuring out it's not just a metering problem, it's an operational problem. Let's put those pieces together, you can see things. Pat mentioned something that we just talked about. One of the utility customers, we've got a story about called Mid-South Synergy. They did this thing with trees. They decided to take a look at trees and outages and what was the relationship. And I've got some stats here I picked up. There was a 60% reduction in tree-related outages. 60%, can you imagine? A 90% decrease in customer complaints about trees, and a significant reduction in, guess what? Employee overtime. So, and they were able to remove these hazardous trees, and just simply by using spatial analysis, were able to significantly improve remember the four things I talked about? Making money, keeping customers happy. That's number 2. They did that. Number 3 was safety, trees not falling over, and compliance, probably, their public utility commission, not having fines or all that sort of stuff. So really, really important. And those are the kind of things that you can say, I'm going to do this in GIS.
So for the utilities that are they're hearing this and they want to level up their discovery game in all these ways that you're talking about, what are some of the specific tools and analysis techniques that you would recommend, jumping into?
We have within the GIS, it's not, remember I asked the question, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear GIS, blah, 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 maps, right? Well, we have this thing called spatial analysis, and it is a process where you can take individual pieces. All right, I'm going to bring in data, I'm going to add and subtract, I'm going to do weighted, all of that sort of stuff. It's called Model Builder. It's been around for a long time. In fact, it's probably the oldest part of GIS, and not just about mapping. In fact, I think one of the first projects that Esri did back before we were even a software company was looking at how to route a transmission line from point A to point B, looking at things like terrain and river crossings and things like that, turns that you could actually optimize. So the tool called Model Builder. Business Analyst also does another tool which allows you to model where businesses are located, what's the SAC codes and all of the things associated with businesses, really to help whether it's your utility or a coffee shop or wherever, or a grocery store, to locate where you should be and what you should do. So those are the tools that use. Of course, the data is an important piece of it. The layers of data. The more information you have, the better off you be. It's always better to have more information than less. So those are the kind of the tools that we use.
I pay attention to what people pay attention to. You and I go to a lot of events. I talk to a lot of people. Dashboards is the thing that always gets people's attention. And so, yeah, I would say if you're looking to level up your discovery game, first put the things that you care about on a dashboard and let people see it. I guarantee you're going to discover things. Right, Bill? You talked about spatial analysis, and that maybe sounds like a big combination of words to some people, but I always like to bring it down to the simplest thing: a heat map. Where are the hot spots of what's happening? Where are the cold spots? Where are the clusters? Because there's always a story there. And we talked a bit about images last time, but this area of image analysis, detecting changes, right, deriving 3D models, also very big in the discovery game, and closely related to AI. We've got built-in tools, we've got assistants, but we also connect to these other models that have been built by others that can operate on your data and help you discover these things.
I'm glad you mentioned dashboards, because I always like to use the term big red blob. And if you think about that old story I told earlier about the customer satisfaction, where's the big red blob of people who are really unhappy with you? Where's that big red blob? And that's a heat map. And the dashboards are, I think probably one of the most popular dashboards ever invented in the history of the world, actually, was when during COVID, when we had those dashboards that everybody looked at. Where are people getting COVID, and where are the hospitals, and where are the places they're getting sick, and where can they go? All of that stuff. That was the global dashboard that I think Johns Hopkins University put together using Esri technology. I don't know how many views, Pat. Millions and millions of views of that dashboard.
I think it was in the billions.
I think so too. Yeah. So that was significant. And think if you're a utility company, use that same technology to figure out of all of the things, I remember when I worked for a power company, the 16,000 manholes we're going to inspect. Which ones we're going to start with? Number one? No, the ones that have the most problems, the ones that are in the most difficult areas to access, the ones that flood every so often. So that's really where you begin. That's where the big red blob is.
I love that. Look out for the big red blob. We're wrapping up here, but I want to give you guys a chance to share one more story, maybe each. I know we've talked about a lot of the interesting patterns you've come across, but as you think back at all these examples, is there a most surprising or most rewarding discovery story that you've come across in your work using GIS for the utilities?
I'll tell you one that I like, and I'm going to go south of the equator again to Australia. But when I first started working for Esri, I met a gentleman named Cookie. He actually came to one of our conferences and spoke about safety. I have never met a more passionate person in utility safety in my whole life. And his claim to fame was that they had reduced their overhead line contacts by 1/3. They have, unfortunately, quite a few accidents, farmers and truck drivers and people contacting overhead lines with farm equipment and different things, resulting in property damage, injury, and then deaths every year. And so they set out to really attack this problem in a relatively straightforward way by looking to see where those lines were at the most risk, by making that readily available to people. And I think that's what we're going to talk about a bit more next time, is how do we take this data and the discoveries and make it readily available for use by people. Anyway, they put that information in the hands of the farmers, the ag pilots, the truck drivers, and reduced their accidents related to overhead line contacts by 1/3. That's huge.
Yeah, every CEO that I've ever run into and company that I've worked, every power company, that is that key performance indicator, the one of the three, safety is right on the top of the list because people's lives depend on it. So I think GIS can save lives.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you once again, Bill and Pat, for joining us today and for sharing these really, really great insights.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Take care. We'll see you next time.
And yeah, and as I mentioned at the top, this episode was once again made possible by the fine folks at Esri. Esri is the global market leader in GIS software, location intelligence, and mapping. With Esri software, you can add the power of location to modernize how you work. Esri helps to digitally transform utilities by enabling users to create, discover, share, and use maps anywhere, anytime, and on any device. The Esri ArcGIS system is a comprehensive GIS allowing organizations to analyze and share their data across the organization. Operators and managers access ArcGIS for improved operational awareness and decision-making. Field and office staff use ArcGIS to manage, update, and analyze information about customers, network assets, and work orders. To find out how to digitally transform your utility, visit www.esri.com/electric to learn more. And as a reminder to our listeners, we've got plenty more episodes headed your way with super smart people who are literally building the future of energy. So don't miss a single episode of The Gist. Hit subscribe to this feed, share an episode with a friend or coworker, and head to Energy Central for even more insights on this technology moving the power industry forward. And we'll see you next week for more.